When I was in Caribbean countries, it was the feeling as if people are moving a lot for kind of employment, for living reasons, for conditions, whatever they are doing, but they are moving around a lot. And secondly, the administrations, if they have seen that they have like, oh yeah, we really need that. It's amazing how effective Caribbean countries can be in making bilateral or even kind of larger agreements in order to make it happen, to say that we really need it. And even without digitalization, they still do it.
Welcome to the Digital Government Podcast. Tune in to discover the future of governance and ways of getting there.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Digital Government Podcast with your usual host, Federico Plantera. I'm a journalist, a sociologist, and researcher. Today, addressing the topic of an intercontinental connection, let's say. We're going to talk about interoperability in the Caribbean, because interoperability, it's not just a matter of technical issues or technical solutions. Cross-border interoperability, specifically, plays a big role in shaping public services and digital services that are secure, efficient, citizen-centric, and it also allows to actually connect different governments and different agencies that in certain geo-economic areas, let's say, can then come together to do something together and to bring forward a policy agenda together. In order to do that, we have today two guests. One is Rodney Taylor, who is the Secretary General of the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, which is an organization basically, I think we could say, at the forefront of this like regional efforts, let's say, of digital transformation. So, Rodney, it's your first time on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you.
Second guest is a known voice of the Digital Government Podcast, and it's Heiko Vainsalu, who is a senior expert in infrastructure and solutions, and also head of the Relative Competence Center at eGovernance Academy. Heiko, welcome back to the podcast.
Nice to be back here.
Rodney, I would start from painting a picture, a bit from the institutional perspective, also from the policy perspective. But I would say, first of all, let's talk about the Caribbean Telecommunications Union itself as an organization, as an institution.
The Caribbean Telecommunications Union is an intergovernmental organization that is an institution of CARICOM. So CARICOM being the Caribbean community. We have 20 member states that are comprised in membership of the CTU. We also have private sector membership, but at the highest level, we have the Conference of Ministers, which is the governing body of the CTU. And those are ministers with responsibility for information and communication technology policy. We meet with them once a year. And one of our primary mandates is the implementation of the CARICOM single ICT space. That is a framework that allows for cooperation on matters of technology to ensure that there's policy harmonization around things like cybersecurity, data protection, modern telecommunications legislation, because the telecommunications infrastructure plays a critical role in building out digital societies. So we're based in Trinidad and Tobago, and we continue to work to ensure that there's cooperation within the member states that we serve.
Perfect. And with today's focus on cross-border interoperability in the Caribbean, so let's get into this dimension exactly of the activities and the scope of digital policy basically in the area, or what is on the horizon, let's say.
Well, in the CARICOM single ICT space I mentioned is a policy framework that was approved by CARICOM heads of government in 2017. So it's been a while, and we've had a few successes under that. The implementation of a roaming regime. Prior to that, there was significant costs to use your mobile phones in other jurisdictions within CARICOM. But in 2022, we were able to agree on a regime through the Declaration of St. George's that was signed in Grenada that allowed for the drastic reduction of roaming, and thereby encouraging people as they move within the single space of the CARICOM to use their mobile phones and transact business and so on. We've also developed guidelines on digital identities to promote interoperability. Many countries are within the space are doing at the national level are doing digital identities, are implementing digital identities, and we're trying to ensure that there's some interoperability. There's acceptance of those credentials as they're presented across the border, and they can be used to support other e-government services, other transactions, and so on, like opening a bank account, for example, in a different jurisdiction. So we've developed some policy documents and recommendations there. We've also done some recommendations in the past on things on harmonized legislation around cybersecurity, data protection, the same legislation I spoke about, telecommunications. And so it's an ongoing work. There's still a lot more to be done. We've had very recently as well discussions with some member states on building out infrastructure like data centers that would allow for the hosting of data, sovereign data by across the border, and things like the incident response capabilities, those that can be shared regionally as well. So yeah, those are just a few, but they fall under the broader framework of the CARICOM single ICT space. Again, focusing on harmonization of policy, agreement on regional projects that support interoperability. I believe, based on the progress we've made so far, that within another 5 years or so, we should have some real tangible projects, in particular around things like data centers, cloud services, and so on.
I think that there is already like a little kind of a takeaway from here, which is that even if we talk about interoperability, obviously as an enabler, let's say, of efficient public service delivery, there are also other things that are enablers of interoperability for their own part, let's say. Heiko, do you wanted to chime in with something on this?
I have been happening to work in the Caribbean region in several occasions, but also rest of the world. And to be honest, in very many scenarios, situations, I've been kind of stumbled on a challenge that how do you do your kind of cross-border services? That yeah, we are doing the national things. We would like to grow up in a kind of bigger scale. And knowing that's already started 10 years ago with the Estonian Finnish agreements, etc., I know that that is always when I'm looking at some geographical region, I'm always asking like, do you have some kind of a facilitation organization who would kind of be the kind of umbrella organization who take care of the different countries and bring your interest together to say that you would have a good leap forward when you are starting to discuss cross-border interoperability. And when I first kind of stumbled upon the CTU and what its role, what its activity, I was like, wow, I was like struck by lightning that amazing, this region, without having the European Union kind of historical legacy and too much variety on the countries and too much of a history of things, the CARICOM and CTU are in a very perfect position to actually being the facilitators, moderators for the region. And just what Rodney told, that what kind of things they have already managed to do within the last few years and implementing this single ICT space, I would say that I would be really, really eager to see what they are doing in the next 5 years, because this is so promising and kind of promising environment that I'm really eager to monitor what's going to happen next.
Heiko, you actually went exactly in the direction of something that I was just thinking to indeed ask Rodney next, because I remember that already, for example, I remember an input that we received in a previous episode of the podcast last year, actually, from Saunders from Turks and Caicos, that made me think about the fact that obviously digitalization can be declined, let's say, in different ways across different geo-economic areas of the world, which means that, and you have mentioned, Heiko, for example, the case that without having maybe the institutional infrastructure, let's say, that, for example, or the theoretical framework about institutional framing of these projects that maybe there is instead in the European Union, just as an example. In any case, in this area, there is something happening, and there are also like facilitating organizations. And exactly on the same line of thinking, Rodney, I actually wanted to ask you, was there maybe some framework of reference, let's say, or institutional arrangements of reference that you have seen in other parts of the world and that somehow have fed, let's say, into the structure itself of the CTU, the purposes of the organization, and also the kind of goals, let's say, that you have set? Or could we say that there is a sort of like Caribbean way to digitalization through the plans that you're making?
Well, the CTO itself is actually relatively old. It was established in 1989. Back then, the focus was on telecommunications, and then there were a lot of monopolies and governments owned operators. So it came out of that era where there was a push towards opening up the markets to more competition to help drive the innovation within the sector. It is actually based quite a bit, the structure of the CTO itself is based quite a bit on the structure of the International Telecommunication Union. That, of course, is a UN agency, it's a global organization driving uh, telecommunications or ICT development globally. It does a lot of regulation where there is need for cross-border regulation and that kind of thing. As the technology itself has evolved, so has the CTU in terms of not just dealing with telecommunications, but dealing with more advanced developments and innovation within the sector. Now, of course, things like artificial intelligence. And so I can't say that it's based specifically on another structure, another region. I know within CARICOM itself, there are other institutions that focus on harmonization in other areas, like public health, for example, like crime and security, agricultural cooperation, and so on. So ours is really based on that model where there are specialized institutions with a focus on helping develop the cooperation within a particular sector. And ours happens to be telecoms, ICT, and of course, information and communication technology, or digital, if you want to call it that, is becoming more prominent as there's continues to be innovation in the sector. As I mentioned now, artificial intelligence and how that is changing the landscape, how it's creating new jobs, new opportunities. And for small islands like ours, we recognize that we don't have the resources within our own national borders, and therefore it's better for us to cooperate on things like artificial intelligence, data centers, cloud services, identities, and that kind of thing. So while there may be national imperatives, there's been a long-standing recognition within CARICOM that there are things that we can do better together, and the institutions reflect the priorities that the governments have identified. And in our case, as I said, information technology.
Heiko, I think that all of this already tells us exactly something, which is that, first of all, digitalization may not look the same across the world. And as a consequence, also interoperability might not look the same across the world. There is obviously this axiom, this theorem, let's say, that can be summarized in two words of like better together. So pooling resources and communicating and bridging, let's say, data between countries and between organizations can help move things forward and digital transformation forward. So I would say let's distinguish a little bit these two plans with you at the moment. So basically, what are the main benefits of interoperability solutions overall? Let's do a little like recap. But then specifically, what do you think that are the benefits of interoperability solutions in this region and with the projects and the initiatives that are happening over there at the moment?
Yeah. So maybe not to go back to the kind of prehistoric times, but I think that better together is the very kind of capsulation of the whole idea. I'm usually when I have to do a lecture on interoperability, I'm always saying that look at the word. It says what it is. It is an ability. So when we are doing interoperability, we are creating possibilities. Now the other part of it is that what are we creating the possibilities for? And I think this is where we have to recognize that there have to be needs, there have to be expectations from the organizations, from the governments to say that they have recognized that alone they can do just as much, but doing together, sharing resources, using resources from others, it would be more useful, more effective, more economical, and therefore creating this possibility for cooperation than having and needing the cooperation. This is where the interoperability benefits will actually start to kick out. And I think your question's second part was about the kind of what's the specifics in the region, right? I would say that Caribbean has the benefit and the luxury of being small countries, and this means that you cannot pool everything with resources. You cannot always kind of allow your peculiarities, but you have to adapt. You have to be flexible. You have to pull in your resources. So they have naturally all the reasons why they would need this interoperability to be actually put in place. And with Rodney, we already have discussed in a context of another project. Maybe we'll come to that also today again. But there are already good initiatives where, let's say, in the paper world, the kind of Caribbean countries are already cooperating. They have streamlined, they have aligned their kind of organizational level of interoperability. Now it's just a matter of putting it into digital, putting reasonable and necessary security kind of layer on top of it, and making sure that things will continue working. So the Caribbean countries have actually the best urgency and need. They have, as a CTU, they have a very good umbrella organization to facilitate these kind of discussions. And still, I would repeat, I'm so anxious to see what's going to happen in the Caribbeans, because there is so good, perfect conditions happening at the same time, or kind of naturally there, that it has to be something amazing that comes out of it. And I don't know, Federico, how much you have been going around, or how many Caribbean countries you have visited. At least for me, the two things that I noticed. One is that I can walk in European countries, and I have to talk to kind of tens and tens of persons when I see somebody from abroad. I see them, that there are external people, but they are like every 10th or hundredth or something like that. When I was in Caribbean countries, I would say it was the feeling as if every third person is kind of has moved from one island to another, and people are moving a lot for kind of employment, for living reasons, for conditions, whatever they are doing, but they are moving around a lot. And secondly, the administrations, if they have seen that they have like, oh yeah, we really need that. It's amazing how effective Caribbean countries can be in making bilateral or even kind of larger agreements in order to make it happen, to say that we really need it. And even without digitalization, they still do it. So I would say that this is like a perfect melting pot of to see a small world where we can see and learn a lot in the near future.
I have I have a thought on that. First of all, I thought that when you were mentioning it has the unique advantage, and with that, 1-2 seconds before you said something, I thought of being a beautiful place. That's like we were going to do like a hashtag visit Caribbeans type of type of spot. But then the second thing that you made me think of is that basically interoperability in the Caribbean, or better, one of the facilitating elements of interoperability, you said the keyword, one of the words that make interoperability really just semantically, like as a term, is ability, but it's also inter, no? So like connection and like cooperation across governments and across barriers, whatever kind of barriers we're talking about, even geographic, even the sea can be a barrier, as we've seen also with projects maybe happening in the Pacific Islands in the past, also a network of places. But this is the thing that you made me think of, so that in real life, both in terms of human and social capital, let's say, and with the aspect of movement that you were mentioning, there is already sort of like a real life network of connections or bilateral agreements that basically needs to be now brought to the digital sphere as a sort of digital twin that makes it work in the area, that makes interoperability a reality, right?
Exactly. The kind of existing relationships between the Caribbean countries are already so tight and so well mixed up that it just makes sense to, and because they are small countries, it makes sense to become more effective and efficient in providing and facilitating these services and establishing a interoperability in the region.
Rodney, you said, and in the CTU there are 20 countries, right? So that's already kind of like a token of this. Did you want to add to this?
Well, yes, there have been times in the past where there were specific projects that we rallied around to promote cooperation, and I like the way that it was framed by Heiko. For example, we've hosted the Cricket World Cup in the past, and cricket is something that we enjoy. We play down here, and in order to host it in different countries, there had to be some information sharing and cooperation. even to allow people to move freely from one jurisdiction to the next to enjoy the cricket matches. So that projects like those tend to drive the cooperation, the intelligence sharing, advanced passenger information sharing as well, um, authentication at the borders. There is a while each country has its own passport, there is a mark which indicates that it is issued. It is a CARICOM issued. It's a CARICOM passport as well, issued of course by the national country, but there are certain rights and privileges that you have once that's presented at the border, and they're being developed with common standards like the ICAO standards and so on that allow for that passport to be read electronically at the border. So I think it's a useful way of framing it. We are promoting integration in the region. What are some of the challenges to achieving that, and how can we solve or address some of those challenges using digital technology, right? Which obviously includes information sharing, sharing of common platforms, sharing solutions that promote the cooperation. So even in things of like financial services, and we don't have a common currency within the market. There is a sub-region called the Eastern Caribbean states have a smaller, tighter knit union that shares a common currency, but each individual country, unlike Europe now, where you have the euro, we have our common currency. So how can we better promote, facilitate cross-border payments using digital technology is something that we are seeking to address as well.
Yeah, I have to say that with this as well, I'm getting a lot of digital single market kind of vibes, let's say. Also, then, did you mention cricket, by the way, before?
Yes, cricket. Cricket is something we play a lot down here, and we've hosted the Cricket World Cup before in different countries. And again, that was being a driver of information sharing and cooperation.
Perfect. And obviously, as a Southern Italian, I can only say that sports with a ball involved often move people in many respects and allow for
Absolutely.
connections to happen. Heiko, you mentioned at another project that you were involved with Rodney, also, or that was involving Rodney before. What were you referring to?
Yes, we are at the EGA. We are involved in a project called Digital Alliance, which is shorthand. There is the EU-LAC, which is the European Union, and Latin American Caribbean kind of cooperation. And the idea or perspective in that project that we are pursuing is to help the LAC region reaching some kind of regional better state of, let's say, very, very high level interoperability. Not just data exchange, but also interoperability in terms of identifiers, identification, also in semanticals, cybersecurity, etc. So, and this is a kind of long-term engagement where we are, although it's somewhat like EU-driven, it is not that EU is prescribing for the Latin American, Caribbean countries what needs to be done and how things have to be done properly, but rather being there to facilitate and to encourage the local discussions to move on faster. So what we have been identifying and figuring out in this project is that because the Latin America, Central America, Caribbean, it's a huge region, right? So it takes like half the world almost, and more than 1 billion people. I don't even want to give an estimate how many countries there are and different cultures. Anyway, the interesting thing is that for the whole region, there is this kind of the motion toward this kind of unified approach of interoperability is, I would say honestly, very poor. But if you look into kind of sub-regions like Caribbean, like Central America, in Latin America, I would say there are like even 2 or 3 maybe smaller regions who are playing together. Then inside these sub-regions, actually the need and necessities for establishing regional interoperability is actually very strong and very well driven. And now we see that this is our kind of perspective and position where we can be helpful, that while helping these sub-regions to kind of engage into this regional interoperability discussions and negotiations, we try to drive these discussions so that in a longer future, these would be at some level compatible and adjustable to each other, to EU, and the whole of the world. Because I think it's the world that we finally want to be interoperable. It's not just 2 countries or 3 countries. So in this sense, if we see that, for example, in Caribbean discussion, there is some domain or some dimension of interoperability that doesn't get necessary attention, we'll bring it on, we'll kind of emphasize the importance, help to kind of encourage this discussion. And at the same time, when we see that some discipline gets maybe too much focus, then we say that, yeah, okay, we're good enough on that. Let's leave it, let's continue, and we'll do this raising of the interoperability in a kind of um, very kind of balanced way. So the project in this sense is really intriguing, and I have been in previously in projects like creating interoperability at national level, creating interoperability between 2 countries, estimating interoperability between like 3 or 4 countries. But now we are looking into this kind of whole Latin America, Caribbean section and like figuring out, wow, that's a big piece of a cake that we have to eat. And I'm really, really intrigued to see where this is gonna evolve in a few years also.
Heiko, following up on that, maybe one initiative or one project that maybe we can mention, not at all with no intention of saying like this is the favorite child at all, considering that exactly there are many initiatives going on in the region. But is there like one example that we could give and that we could get into to give, let's say, exactly like an idea of what one, let's say, interoperability project in the region looks
Uh,
like?
Maybe I would give like two, and they're very different and from very different maturity levels. So
Perfect.
the first one would be that in Latin America, in the Mercosur countries, there has been within the last 1.5 years a huge kind of explosion of cross-border identities. There are several countries very close to the European Union EIDAS model are emerging up this kind of a federated identity model, and we very much like to see like how it grows bigger into Central America, maybe links up to Caribbean. What's going to happen next? So this is somewhat like mature. It already works in some of the Mercosur countries. It's something where there is a very strong push and drive already, kind of without the ULAC project. But from the ULAC project, what we are doing as second engagement is that we are planning for this spring to conduct a series of the kind of a tabletop pilots in kind of specifically for data exchange, and we are looking to do these tabletop pilot exercises in something in the very south of Latin America, something in the Caribbean, something in Central America, because they all have to follow the same kind of model and kind of methodology, how to kind of theoretically build up interoperability. And for example, it seems most promising that in the Caribbean we might be able to kind of reuse exactly the kind of those business scenarios that have already kind of in a physical world, on a paper-based world, are very well established between the countries. That is something called the skills certificate of CARICOM, which is something that we think that we can play on this tabletop exercise to see what it would take, and then with the help of CTU and maybe some other organizations, it would be possible to actually go into real pilot implementation and see how these things can work out. So I know here was a lot of different words and acronyms, so I rather won't start to explain all of them. Otherwise, we're going to need like 2 more days for this podcast episode. But maybe Rodney wants also to add something on top of that.
Yeah, I think the idea is that we have to demonstrate value, and the skills certificate that was mentioned is something that is required to move and work freely. That is pretty much, even though governments have set up their own national systems, some of them still are still dealing with paper certificates. And what we are saying is we'd like to create a project where those certificates can be issued through one common platform where they can be accepted. We agree on the standards, the information that is to be captured, and how that can be presented across the border when people arrive, so that it takes any of the frustration of having to present a paper credential. And also, there's a lot of that goes on behind the scenes in order to issue a certificate like that. For example, if you've lived in a country for, I don't remember the exact period of time, but if you've lived in a country before, say in Jamaica or Trinidad, then one of the things you'll need is a background check. So you'll need to get a police certificate of character, for example. And imagine trying to do that from 5 different countries with 5 different rules and different policies on how they're issued and so on. In some cases, you may have to present yourself in person. In some cases, you can apply online. So just agreeing on common standards for that. And again, how those credentials can be presented when you arrive in the country, that would take some of the frustration or any of the friction out of this free movement. So that is something that I'm excited about, and it's something that we think can add value to the single ICT space. And I think once we're able to demonstrate that very clearly, we can build on that and deliver on some other key initiatives.
Rodney, following up on this, considering that we are about at the end of this podcast episode, and you have mentioned that in any case there is room and way to go still towards the objectives, not just of the CTU, but exactly to achieve the wider goals of interoperability and digital transformation in the area, then I would say that the last question that I would ask you is simply on what, in your opinion, and like from your point of view, either the personal one or that of the CTU, still needs to be done in order to drive forward these processes like even more.
So in order to move forward and to move forward in any accelerated way, we need political will and we need commitment, determination to move forward. So of course there are challenges doing anything across border, even within a union, because of national priorities and national commitments. Countries are at different levels in terms of their digital transformation initiatives. Some are still paper-based. Some have gone ahead and digitized some processes and data. So it really requires the political will and commitment at the highest level, and a determination on our part as the implementing agency to work with the international partners, work with the EU, work with Estonia that has done these kind of initiatives before and have seen as sort of global leaders in things like identities and interoperability. So yeah, just for us, a commitment and a determination. We are going to start with this partnership through the project we mentioned on the skills certificate, and we'll go from there. But it just requires determination, day and night, political will and commitment, in order to get it done.
Heiko, a closing remark from your side?
I would say again the same thing that I've told twice already. The Caribbean region is just so sweet, so interesting, so many opportunities are there that I would expect very big things from CTU, from Rodney, and all the kind of countries who are very, very active there currently. So that I think we should do this like a permanent session every year, that we are bringing somebody from the Caribbeans to follow the progress and see how it goes on. Because yeah, I don't know what's the English expression, or I'm crossing my fingers for the Caribbeans, because I think the interoperability there will be amazing.
And for today, we had indeed Rodney Taylor, Secretary General of the CTU. Thanks for joining us for this podcast.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
And Heiko, thanks to you as well for coming back.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Thanks a lot also to all the listeners who tuned in for this new episode of the Digital Government Podcast. And that's it also from your host, Federico. I will see you all at the next one.
This podcast is brought to you by the eGovernance Academy. Tune in next time.